Hi everyone, welcome back to the Watch Insider. My name is Brian and thank you for logging on. I'm joined tonight by Tim Masso.
Welcome guys.
And we've got a great show for you this evening. Welcome everybody, Eddie Landsberg, Russell 996, Blue Shirt Buddha, Robert Dixon, to all the guys that continue to watch us every week. Thank you so much. I'm going to move my chair while you talk a little bit.
Okay, excellent. Guys, we have the best selection of watches on the table for quite some time, including one that I used to own. We also have a favorite of mine from GP. We're approaching the GP-HG 2018, so we're taking a rear view mirror look 5 years hence. We may as well open with Big Bore. How big? 46 millimeters. This is actually the small one. In 2013, Gerard Perregaux wowed us with the constant escapement, and in 2016, it launched a titanium 46 millimeter model. The original was white gold and 48. So what are we looking at? Let's talk about the tech. Okay, one big silicon butterfly ringing the center dial. There's a very small 14 micron silicon rubber band, if you will, strung between the two sides. These two impulse wheels actually transfer their energy from the twin mainspring barrels and 3 feet of mainspring into that elastic band. Imagine you're holding a credit card between two fingers, you compress it, it creates an arc. You take another finger and you push it until it snaps the other way, and you do that back and forth, creating effectively a remontoire d'égalité, a constant force device crafted out of a single reactive ion etched component of silicon. It's an impressive piece. Maximum wind, minimum wind, the same energy via elastic silicon structure transferred to the balance, and the movement itself is 39 millimeters across and 8 millimeters deep, so it's a gorgeous thing to view at an angle. You can look through it from top and bottom. You can also look at it diagonally, and because this watch is technically part of the Bridges collection, you can see the imagery and the form of the 3 golden bridge blazoned on the dial side as well as the reverse. 6-day power reserve manual wind and a GP-HG champion. Hey, and it's loomed.
So for those of us that have no idea what you just said, give us like the simplified version of what constant escapement is.
The same amount of force goes to the escapement regardless of how much force is in the mainspring.
And what does that mean?
Very even isochronism and regularity from maximum wind to minimum wind.
Got it. So that's very similar to Journe's Optimum, correct?
It's very similar to any of his watches with the remontoire because Journe uses a spring, but he uses a conventional titanium spring. This is silicon and it's elastic. The interesting thing about this escapement is that Nicolas Dehaene, who started the work at Rolex in 1998, and they actually built it right up to the prototype stage before Rolex decided it didn't want anything to do with this. He moved to GP in 2000. He had a prototype working by 2008. This watch dropped in 2013, but for a judgment call at Rolex in the late 20th century, this could have been a Rolex caliber.
Yeah, and so, why this is great or why this is interesting is because most watches, as they power down from a full wind down to call it, zero reserve, they lose some of the ability to accurately tell time. And what's great about this is that whether you're at full power or the watch is literally about to die, the timekeeping capability is going to stay exactly the same.
Yeah, so you can focus on regulating the watch rather than trying to compensate for maximum wind and minimum wind. For example, the IWC Big Pilot was originally designed with the intent that people would only wear it on the weekend. So it was the thought that it would just lose time all week, and so it would run too fast for the days it was charged up, but then it would lose time for 5 days and even out. The problem? People started wearing it every day, and the original Big Pilot would run 15-20 seconds fast every single day. Well, the reason is alternating amounts of force, too much and too little reaching the escapement. You don't have that problem with this watch.
Yeah. So let's move along. Let's do another watch with the bang. So here we have a beautiful watch. I don't know if we've brought it on the show before. Here we have an A. Lange & Son double split. And the quick synopsis of this watch is that it came out in 2014. Is it 2014, Tim?
2004.
Sorry, 2004. I was close. And it gives you the ability to time not only 2 different seconds, but 2 different minutes. Up to 30 minutes. And why that's great is unlike a normal split second where you can only time one event down to the second, you can actually time 2 events down to both minutes and seconds. So it's a pretty ingenious complication, and overall it's basically a datagraph on steroids.
Also important to note, this watch was created only 10 years after Lange itself launched the first post-Soviet watches under the Lange und Sohne name. So the fact that this happened a decade later from the ashes of communism, a bunch of guys in Saxony basically built a Patek Challenger in a decade from nothing. And this was the ultimate fruit 10 years later. Now, of course, there's now a triple split that lets you split the seconds and the minutes and the hours, but so far only 100 of those, and only in white gold. That's a 2018 novelty. This thing is still the bomb, though, and I happen to prefer the sheer heft of this timepiece in platinum. It's just something else. We'll have to wait for a triple split in platinum to top this thing.
But interestingly enough, though, I prefer the look of the traditional datograph or up-down, or even the datograph perpetual to this watch, as far as the aesthetics go. But then if I'm comparing this to, let's say, the Patek, 5370 split, I prefer the aesthetics of that watch. So while, I would say like the guts of this watch are obviously probably a little bit more complicated, overall, like, how do you feel about the look of the piece?
I love it, but then again, I like the blockish Lange case profile. The 5370 from Patek is a much, much thinner watch. Mm-hmm. It's also a less capable watch. If you want to have 2 full 30-minute chronographs in one case, something's got to give, and what gives is ultimately the slimness of the case. But then again, that's not really a Lange core value. They have thin watches, but if you think of the Lange 1, the Dado, the Zeitwerk, like the iconic pillars of the brand, they're generally not the ultra slim. They tend to be more rich than thin.
Yeah, I mean, this to me, I think, very much embodies like the essence of the brand.
Yeah, definitely. No question. And the nice thing about it is it has such incredible depth, but it's also visible. There are some watches that are compound complications, and all you see is the upper third of the movement, especially when they're automatic. The fact that this is manually wound and the split bridges were all constructed while leaving the lower works visible is probably the ultimate achievement of the Lange watchmakers. I don't know if Anthony de Haas was captaining the ship back then, but I'm sure he had his input on the triple. He was quite a proud father this year at SIHH. All right, let's jump to something very simple from there.
Let's do it. Which one do you want to do?
Let's go with a Reverso.
Okay. So right here we have a Reverso tribute with a blue lacquer dial. It is actually a duo. This particular watch is a special edition watch that came out after the similar red dial lacquer version, except obviously this particular watch is a duo. So it is a special edition watch, meaning that it was boutique only, but it was not a numbered limited edition. So it was pretty much produced in low quantities, for those boutiques, and was only available, I want to think, for a 1 or 2 year production run.
That's about right. That and the red. The red came out in 2012. This came out in 2013. This one was notable because it was part of the short-lived generation of Reversos that featured a tool-free adjustment of the travel time, but also had a visible adjuster on the case flank. In 2016, this entire architecture went away, and they incorporated the travel time adjuster into the hidden face of the case itself. So there was a very narrow band of time when they were making this case side pusher adjuster. And I have to say, of all the duos, this is probably my favorite. It's elemental. It's one of the few tribute watches JLC made that actually surpasses the original. There's a blue lacquer dial in the Heritage Center, their museum. I've seen that. I actually prefer this. This and the red, the few tributes that surpass the original. We've got a watch on the table from JLC that is almost exactly the original. It doesn't surpass, it duplicates. Mm-hmm. So let's go with the, now, can you believe it, 1 decade old JLC tribute to Polaris.
So, and what's so, I think, special or interesting about this watch is that just this past year, they actually completely relaunched the Polaris line. So what you see is a complete reimagining of the model last year. But I actually think that this is one of the, call it, most true to the original watches that they've done as far as a tribute's concerned. And, I think it's beautifully executed. It's measured down to be able to go down 200 meters, even though it's not a screw down crown. You can show them just how straight on, like we're looking right now, you almost can't even tell that the crystal's there. But when you look from the side profile, I mean, you really see that it's as you mentioned to me earlier, it's almost like a core and bubble watch. So it's pretty crazy how that effect happens. And is it a monoblock case?
It's not a monoblock case, and for good reason. There's actually a resonator on the case back, and it's designed to create a dramatic ring and sustain underwater. Unlike the tribute to Deep Sea that came out 3 years later, this is a very audible and resonant watch on the surface as well. Important things to note, only 768 of these made. It's considerably scarcer than the tribute to Deep Sea that came later, and it is really more of a re-edition than a tribute. The main difference, and this is how you can tell them apart from an arm's length, is that this has more of a rounded and cambered plexiglass on it, whereas the original has more of a blockish, squared off profile. Another thing that's often lost is the crispness of the case bevels, as well as the quadrille sectioning of the 3 crowns. The watch, originally based on a case that anyone could buy back in the 60s, it was the super compressor case used by virtually everyone. This one was distinctive among them because while the standard super compressor had 2 crowns, this one had 3. One for the bezel, one for winding and setting the movement, and one for setting the alarm. And I am actually going to set the alarm right now, and we're going to hear it, because this is a modern Memovox. This is where the tribute ends and the modern tech begins.
And it's one of my favorite things when you look back to watches from the 50s and 60s, just how many similarities there are between the lines. The retro Tag Heuer that I have pretty much almost has an identical case to this, just in a smaller size. And you see back then just how different it is from today as far as manufacturing capabilities go, in that a lot of the case manufacturers were producing for a lot of the brands. And you see...
Well, the brands didn't have case factories.
Correct. They didn't have case factories at the time. And you just see so many similarities amongst the watches and the designs.
And by the way, this notable fact was the first ever JLC Memovox to have a quick set date. It only took them from 1950 to 2008 to make that happen. A very special piece. They made 768 of these. They actually made more of the original Polaris than they made of this.
Very cool watch. So I brought a lot of JLC today. And guys, please feel free, ask any questions in the chat if you have questions about these watches or anything else in general. That's what this show is all about today.
We have 2 El Primeros on the table, one of which is an El Primero in wolf's clothing. Why don't we start with the aggressive one, and then we'll go to the historic one.
So here we have a Hublot King Power Unico. Hold this up here, with an El Primero movement in a black ceramic case, in a 41 millimeter size. And I think that this is a watch, and when it first came out, that it was very much outside. It was very much outside the typical Big Bang case. And Hublot needed a different case, I think, to really create a new line extension. And they came out with this watch, but when they came out with it in this smaller 41 millimeter size, it fits incredibly well. And they came out with it at a time in which obviously you can see the similarities with a Richard Mille watch. But inside this watch you have an El Primero movement with a black ceramic case, black rubber strap. It fits incredibly well, and for the price point, I really think it is a really nice, great sports watch.
Yeah, back in 2014, Hublot decided, with the spirit of Big Bang, don't confuse it with the standard Big Bang, but with the spirit of Big Bang, it was going to go after the late stragglers of the Franck Muller movement, as well as the avant-garde of the Richard Mille. A lower price point with the same look of a Richard Mille. It actually has manufacturing and mechanical integrity about it, because from the beginning, the spirit of Big Bang, powered by a Zenith El Primero caliber 400 inside. 50-hour high beat, the movement. It turns 50 next year, and I'm excited to see what happens. Now, this was part of a limited series to celebrate both the all-black movement that Hublot coined back in 2006, somewhat infamously. A contradiction in terms. You have a watch that's perhaps physically striking on the wrist, but as easy as it is to see, it's that difficult to read. Nevertheless, if you are of a mechanical persuasion, you'll appreciate the fact that almost all of these models feature some sort of open dial that allows you to access the caliber visually without taking it off the wrist, and especially when there's a Zenith El Primero inside, that's particularly appealing. You will note, ceramic case, limited edition of 500, a special piece, more wearable than the original in 41 millimeters.
So I do agree, this particular dial happens to be difficult to read. They make many different variations of the watch, which, will have more legibility. But I think that one of the common reactions always is that, this is very similar to an RM, or this, which it is. But again, an RM case is still similar to a Casablanca case from Franck Muller. So, I guess to say that, if the inverse were the case, and the spirit of the Big Bang was insanely popular, and Richard Mille came out with a watch, or Richard Mille was in decline, you would say that it looked exactly like this. So, I don't think there's anything wrong with this watch looking like a Richard Mille, because there's plenty of brands that create things that look like, watches from other brands. But from a value proposition for what this costs relative to that, and for, the quality of this movement having an El Primero, I think that if one's going to be $100,000 plus more than the other, to me, this is almost a no-brainer.
Well, there's nothing wrong with admitting where the mark is certainly on Richard Mille right here, or at least Richard Mille intenders. Just like the Oris Aquis green ceramic is clearly targeted and clearly inspired by the Rolex Hulk, it's okay to admit what your inspiration is and what look you're going for. This is the Swiss watch industry after all. So again, no shame, I think, in Hublot going for that kind of look, considering the original Big Bang was heavily influenced by a big watch from Reverso. I think it's very much in the spirit of the Hublot manufacturer to take some of the ideas that are working and repackage them in a way that's a little bit different and perhaps a bit more accessible, and that's certainly what this watch is. And again, it's an El Primero at heart. Okay, let's jump into a watch that's overtly Zenith.
Let's do it. So here we have a 38 millimeter El Primero watch. So this watch is, I don't want to call it like a vintage inspired watch, but it is very similar to the original. So you've got here the tricolor registers, 38 millimeter case, stainless steel bracelet. What I really love about this watch is that it very much looks like a traditional Zenith, or it has a lot of the, the good feels that an older Zenith would have, at a reasonable price point. And it's sort of, it's not the most expected watch that you would see on somebody's wrist. And, I think that it's a great piece, especially if you're looking to purchase something maybe outside of a Rolex or an IWC. I think that this is an often overlooked watch.
I'm also going to say this, on this particular revision of the classic A386, because the 1969 Zenith A386 is the inspiration for this, but this modern iteration of the dial fixed the original revival dial in that you have complete chronograph minute and hour registers that are intact and readable in their entirety. So not only does it reference history pretty directly and successfully, in my opinion, but it's actually a more functional watch than the first efforts at reviving this dial, which had rather obnoxiously clipped sub-registers. Also, it's a wonderfully wearable watch. You just saw the 41 millimeter Spirit of Big Bang. This is even more compact and wearable. This is a perfect watch in every way. I have no objections to this. It's even 100 meters water resistant and loomed. If you're looking for a one and only and a Rolex Daytona's too mainstream for you, go with this. I'd also shout out the fact that the bracelet is totally seamless, and you'll note in profile interlinked and countersunk, so there's no gap between the links, and every individual link on both sides of the bracelet is fixed by a screw, removable and sizable. This is a brilliant little watch.
Yeah, and what I really also like about this watch is that it's the sort of piece that I think looks incredibly good on a bracelet, but you could also remove the bracelet, put it on a strap, and it would also look great. So it's a lot of optionality in one watch, and it's not the sort of piece, again, that you would say, well, it looks good on a bracelet but not a strap. You could go either way on it, and I think that it would still look awesome.
And that is an important distinction from something like a Rolex Daytona. And this watch has that feature in common with something like an Omega Moon watch. It would look natural and appropriate on a strap, whereas the second you take a modern full bracelet Daytona off that bracelet, unless you're fitting a Rolex strap and end links, which requires a bit of dealer surgery, it's not going to look right. This would absolutely look natural on any kind of strap. And it's a lovely piece.
Yeah, it was really nice. So let's do a little bit of bling right here.
Yeah, definitely. My computer's gone to sleep. This is a watch I used to own, so if you're interested in something that I used to have for the same reasons that I certainly recommend it. This was a grail watch for me for years, the 2003 JLC Reverso Platinum No. 2 Tourbillon. It's a solid white gold dial, ruthenium coated. It is a solid white gold bridge and plate collection, and I should probably wind this one up. But you can see that the watch, originally designed by JLC movement engineer Rachel Torresani, was designed to be spectacular. The case is platinum, and in order to get it around the tourbillon cage, the gadrons were actually hand engraved. So you have that hand-painted ruthenium-coated dial with the sterling silver Breguet numerals hand-painted on with silver paint, and then on the back you have hand engraving. You have a movement with an overcoil hairspring, 3 Hz beat rate, adjusted in 6 positions, and this sensational Côte Soleil across the white gold bridges. Give it a great home, guys. It had a great one with me, and it was an absolute thrill to own this piece for the 3 years I had it. A limited edition of 500 pieces. I can say this, I've never seen another, and in the years I've been here, we've never had another. Have we ever had one, as far as you know?
I don't think so. No.
Coaxial power reserve, by the way, on the dial. Coaxial with the hands, 42 hours.
And it's interesting, too, for an edition of that size to really see to really see none is very interesting, because you would think that they would have popped up by now, but I guess, when was it produced?
2003, and here's the thing, they didn't make all of them. They didn't sell all of them, so they didn't make all of them. 500 was the series, but the actual number made was probably just short of 300, based on the serials I've seen.
Correct. And, again, for those that are watching, that's it's very much a common practice in that even if, you had an edition back then of 500 pieces, very often what they would do is gauge the overall interest in the watch and how well it was selling, and they would produce until needed. So they, if they weren't entirely sure how well an edition would do, they could give it a number, for example, 500 pieces, and then produce as needed, giving them the ability that, let's say, hey, there's only 300 made, there's not as much demand for the piece moving into 2005 or 2006, they stop producing.
I just want to show this real quick because we've got a full platinum clasp, and this is something that ceased after 2005. JLC now fits platinum watches with a white gold clasp. Back in the last days of the single fold deployment, if you got a platinum watch from JLC, you got a full platinum clasp. As a result, this is a Grand Tie size case that feels like a full Rolex dive watch. With the clasp and the case combined, it is incredibly massive, and that's before you even consider that it's got a white gold bridge and plate combo. A very hefty little piece.
All right. Any more questions from the chat here? Late, but also first time joining. Welcome, Puyang7. Thank you for joining in on the show. We've got here, while Tim is looking at the chat, I will talk about this watch, because it's not often that I bring on gold watches onto the show.
Not yellow gold.
Not yellow gold. So here we have, Tim will hold it up so you guys can see, an all yellow gold 41 millimeter Royal Oak chronograph with a blue dial. And, why this piece is so fascinating to me is this watch came out, I want to say, in 2016, I believe, 2015, 2016. And why I found it so fascinating is because at this time, yellow gold still really wasn't being produced by a lot of the brands in the industry. Again, Patek was still producing yellow gold dress watches, but a lot of the other brands were only producing watches in stainless steel and rose. And, you could see that there was a demand for yellow gold, maybe not as strong as rose, but it was definitely coming. And, AP struck while the iron was hot, and they produced a series of these watches, predominantly for their own boutiques. Now, they did send some out to retailers, but I would say at least 95% of them or more were sold within their own boutique network, and they were all produced in very small quantities. And their yellow gold happens to be particularly bright. And what I so like about it is that it's got a very yellow cast to it, almost as if it's 22 karat gold, but it's not. I like that bright yellow look. It really differentiates itself from the rose gold version of the watch, which definitely has a pinker tone. And the blue dial, offers a stark contrast, against the yellow. And unlike the current version of the watch, this particular version actually does have screw down pushers. Tim will explain what that means. And you also have all three registers are the same size, and it's all one color. And I just think that this happens to be a phenomenal watch that very few were produced.
Yeah, as discussed, this was a one-year watch because shortly after this debuted, the chronograph was redesigned, and that changed in two ways. First, the registers are now asymmetrical, the dates moved a bit, this was a one-year dial. It was also a one-year case, as the new watch features screw-down look pushers, but they are not in fact screw-down. This watch featured true screw-down pushers, so the case design and the pusher appointments were different. In my opinion, though the water resistance is rated the same, I'll bet on screw-downs every day of the week if you actually want to swim with the watch. Other features, Brian mentioned that this is almost a more vivid yellow gold. I would bet that this is what's known as 3N yellow gold, a little bit more intense and, if I might, yellower than conventionally used on most. And you'll also note the dial is a different color. This is not the same galvanized blue that's used on the steel watches or even the rose gold watches. It is a lighter color, a little bit more luminescent, shimmering, reflective to match the lighter color of the yellow gold. This is a one model blue hue. You'll only find it on the yellow gold models.
Yeah, and I think that for me, there's something almost iconic about an all yellow gold watch. I tend to like them more than I like maybe an all rose gold watch. I don't know, even though yellow gold doesn't look as good on me as rose gold looks. And then we have somebody from the chat mentioned if you want yellow gold with blue dial, go for the Submariner. And I mean again, I do think it's it's an absolutely awesome choice. There's something about an all gold Rolex that it's gold, but it does not have a blingy appeal to it.
Yellow
And I
gold
can't
is
explain
tough.
it.
I find that yellow gold works best on a watch with a strap and a smaller size. The size of that watch is bordering on what's possible for a guy with standard male panache to pull off. Granted, if you've got that kind of raffish flair and the confidence to make it work, that could be an awesome watch for Miami, for LA, the Mediterranean coast. I don't necessarily think that is a Philadelphia watch.
No, I mean, that's a little bit, again, it is a little bit much for me. But again, it's also big for me. So if I had a little bit of a bigger wrist, I think I could pull it off better. Somebody mentioned the 15202 in yellow gold, and I think that's a much better fitting watch, at least for my wrist size.
I would love to see an offshore version of that on a full bracelet.
We have the all platinum.
Yeah,
which is
but
crazy.
That's a white metal. That could be steel to someone who doesn't know. That could not be steel. I would like to see an offshore version of that. AP, break the rules, right? Make it happen.
All right.
Okay, questions. Let's see what's going on in the
let's
chat tonight. All right. First of all, guys, I want to say I am looking forward to SIHH. It is not that far off. I'm going to make a prediction. If I had to predict what's going to happen this year at SIHH, I'm going to say JLC finally reopens its account with some sort of crazy complication. There have been too many years of simple steel watches. I think it's time for them to shoot the moon again, and I predict it will be some kind of a repeating watch.
You think?
Yeah.
They've done repeating watches before.
No, I think it's going to be a repeating watch this year, and I'm not saying a little bird told me, but there might have been some whispers in the trees. Also, I think it's important to note that this will be the last year for a couple of brands at SIHH. Do you think RM's going to do anything out of the ordinary to mark the occasion? They've been a big part of the show for a long time.
Now, so they pulled out starting when? Next year?
They're going to be here this year. This will be their last year.
You know what? I don't really think that they're necessarily going to do anything maybe to mark the occasion. They made the announcement that they're going to be leaving the show. AP made the announcement that they're going to be leaving the show. I think that the message that it's really sending is that as far as their distribution channels go, which tend to be a lot smaller than some of the other brands, they can do a different type of event and really to relay the type of products that are coming out. And with watches that, again, for the most part, are being much more allocated to boutiques, with a smaller retail network, you're really just trying to get it out to your customer network who's not attending SIHH anyway.
Well, there's RM, which has like one watch a year at SIHH. AP is kind of the next topic. AP is going to have a new dress watch line. If I had to call it AP, also RM and AP, they're financially linked. One holds a stake in the other. They're both withdrawing after 2019, so AP was my next hit on the list. They're going to have a new dress watch line, and I suspect we're going to see something dramatically different from the jeweled Audemars.
Do you think it's going to be similar to the anniversary piece that they came out with, where it's like the crystal goes up against the edge? You know the one that I'm talking about?
Yeah, the Royal Oak Offshore.
Yeah.
That I actually don't think their watch is going to be like that, because I think if you make that more than a special edition, low volume, crazy watch, people start chipping crystals and getting angry.
Right.
So I don't think it will look like that. I do think they're going to look long and hard at FP Journe and try to figure out what they're doing that makes people buy 30-meter water-resistant, non-loomed dress watches in precious metal.
Yeah.
So I think that's what AP is going to be looking at. I also think it will be interesting to look across and see what the morning after is like for IWC. They had a great 150th anniversary collection, very well received, awesome stuff, and we're starting to get into the point where Christophe Granger is now at a point where his stamp is on the brand. Georges Kern has been gone for 2 years. We're going to find out what the new CEO is doing with the company, and that's going to be interesting because there's, for the most part, managerial consistency across the other brands. And I guess the final question I've got for the SIHH this year is whether Piaget will ever get it together. I like the brand. I think it's got a great history, but you could miss them unless you're looking out for them. So that's the last question.
I think that's
a show that small and they still disappear.
But you know what? I think that's more because, just from the brand doesn't have the same presence in the United States as it does in other parts of the world, so we just don't pay the same level of attention to it as we do, a Cartier or one of these other brands.
I guess I'm in a different perspective, because I'm usually going around with the press corps, and you're usually at the buying meetings. The press corps is very into it, but it's always like, these are great watches, I didn't know you had them. And that's from people who are in the media, who are supposed to be getting press kits whether they want them or not in their email. So I would say Piaget needs to work on communication. IWC needs to find some way to work some of their 150th anniversary pieces into regular production. I would love to see some sort of regular production version of the Paul Weber Escapement. I think that
because IWC hit it out of the. I think they hit it out of the park this past year. Everybody loved the watches. Both, even the Paul Weber, as you said, again, has done incredibly well. If anything, they need more.
They need to protect the people who bought the anniversary watches, which is why I'm thinking there will be something like a Paul Weber Portofino or Portuguese as a regular offer for the jump hour, jump minute, so that the people who bought the original watch, which was not part of any IWC regular collection, are protected. They have a unique piece, but they're not going to bury that 94-200 movement, because it's a gem. They could sell it for 1/5 the price of a Zeitwerk in a normal production steel watch.
Well, the Portuguese Chrono did receive, for example, a sapphire crystal case back, so they did make a few differences to the watch that I'm sure will now move into the regular production of the watch. But somebody mentioned here, what is Journe doing at SIHH? So they already actually released the watches that are going to be coming out at SIHH. So if you look online and just Google Journe 2019, you'll see that the biggest things that are going to be coming out is he's revamped the Octasport line. So they did away with the 40 millimeter Octasport. It's now going to be a 44 millimeter case with a yellow dial, gray dial, some different dials. Obviously, you still have the mono pusher chronos that he had done last year, and he is also going to be doing a new version of the Resonance 3 is being transitioned out. I don't know if that's even been discussed.
It's being discussed. I would be surprised if there weren't some sort of mod to the Tourbillon, because this year it's going to be 20 years of that watch. That was his first watch. They're celebrating 20 years as a brand. RM is also celebrating 20 years as a brand, which is one reason I thought they might be doing something special on their way out the door. It's their last year at the SIHH. It's 20 years of RM. But with FP Journe, it's a bigger deal because it's 20 years since he started making watches under his own name. RM didn't come out with their first watch till 2001. So I think you're going to see something big, celebratory, and limited from Journe, other than what we've seen already. I don't think anyone goes into SIHH with their entire hand revealed. I think there are going to be some interesting surprises there. As far as the independents, it was more interesting last year. There are twice as many brands at the show as there used to be 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think just more brands are gravitating towards SIHH. There's always incentives to go, and it's obviously not as big as Basel World, so perhaps they think that there's overall less brands there, maybe they'll get some more attention.
Go there, guys. There's a public day if you want.
Yeah.
One less day overall this year, but there's public days now. It's a very fan-friendly show.
And Andrew, so no new FP Journe Tourbillon SIHH? I don't believe so, no. I don't think that there's going to be this year, but we do know that he did discontinue his biggest complication. And then on a different note,
we got a picture of it up on the shelf, the Sonnery.
The Sonnery. And then he's also transitioning out of the Resonance, which they said that they'll transition into something else, which I think will probably be far more complicated. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm sure he'll keep the Tourbillon and make tweaks, but the Resonance will ultimately become a more complicated watch. And it could be a combination of that with the Resonance, who knows?
I can be completely honest. I know what the next FP Journe high complication is going to be, and I'm not allowed to share it, but I do know. I think that the rank and file watches will see a revision. I would like to see something done with the Tourbillon for old time's sake. It would be great if they just said, we're going to make 20 pieces like the original Souscription run. They're going to be made by FP. They're going to be very handmade, which means imperfect, but it's going to be the same dial, the same typeface, the same bolt size, the same movement, the same half bridge for the remontoir. If they actually did that, I think that would be super cool.
Yeah.
And by the way, bring money.
Yeah. But I think that we are out of time for this evening. So again, everybody that came on and watched, we had a lot of people watching the live show tonight. So thank you guys.
We hit the record, 195 live.
Beautiful. So again, as always, please feel free to email Tim or myself if you have any questions or if you want us to talk about anything on the show. And again, I am Brian.
I'm Tim.
And thank you guys for logging on.